Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and uncover the chaotic reality behind Fyodor Dostoevsky's very polished online legacy. Look, if you've spent any time at all on the internet, you've definitely seen his intense, bearded face staring back at you. It's usually paired with some profound, moody quote about human nature, right? But the truth is, the man behind these viral words lived a life that was far more extreme, tragic, and honestly, unbelievable than any meme could ever capture. Today, we're going to explore exactly how madness, death, and devastating personal flaws forged one of the greatest literary minds in human history.
Section 1. The Social Media Sage. Behind the Memes.
So we really have to start by acknowledging just how ubiquitous Dostoevsky has become. He is basically the ultimate voice of wisdom on the internet today. But, long before Facebook and Instagram existed to package his thoughts into these bite-sized pieces of inspiration, people were already treating him like a prophet. Even the Tsar himself revered him as a saintly figure. So why is this 19th century Russian author constantly quoted to give depth to modern social media posts? Well, people quote him to add weight to their own thoughts. We treat him as this guy who went to the absolute edge of human experience and somehow managed to bring back the ultimate truth. We see him as this flawless sage, but as you'll see, his reality was vastly different. As this quote hints at, kindness and cruelty combined in him astonishingly. His insights, they didn't come from some peaceful ivory tower. Not at all. They came from a deeply messy, chaotic, and tragic reality. He didn't just casually observe the edge of human experience. He practically fell off it, repeatedly.
Section 2. The First Psychoanalyst. Before science, there was fiction. Now, what's really fascinating here is his surprising legacy as the true father of psychoanalysis. Long before psychology was a formalized scientific discipline, the experts were looking at Dostoevsky. Heavyweights in the field have openly credited his novels as foundational texts for understanding the dark corners of the human mind. Sigmund Freud actually wrote an entire study titled Dostoevsky and Parricide. The psychoanalyst Louis Breger wrote a whole book treating him as the very first real psychoanalyst. And Otto Kernberg, who is a massive expert on narcissism, essentially said his own academic work was really just providing commentary on Dostoevsky's novels. Crazy, right? To understand why, you just have to look at his novel Crime and Punishment. The protagonist, Raskolnikov, has this bizarre, complex dream about a man beating a horse. Within the pages of the novel, Dostoevsky notes how dreams stitch together totally unrelated, absurd details into a sequence that feels entirely logical to the dreamer. And by doing so, they reveal buried psychological truths. He was literally mapping out the theory of the unconscious and repressed thoughts through fiction years and years before Freud ever formulated his scientific theories. He pretty much invented modern psychology with a pen and paper.
Section 3. A Crucible of Suffering. The Making of a Genius.
So, where did this profound understanding actually come from? Well, he certainly didn't grow up sheltered. His father was a doctor at a charity hospital for the absolute poorest and most destitute people in society. As a sensitive kid, Dostoevsky literally played hide-and-seek in the hospital courtyard with sick, blind, and deformed children. But the psychological complexity really began inside his own home, shaped by a massive dichotomy between his parents. You had a gentle, deeply religious mother who taught him concepts of faith and forgiveness. And then you had his father, a strict, military doctor whose unpredictable temper could be absolutely terrifying. This extreme contrast of profound kindness and harsh cruelty permanently shaped his psychological makeup. But that fragile family dynamic shattered when Dostoevsky was just 15 years old. His beloved mother died slowly and painfully. Decades later, he would write so movingly about the poetic tragedy of losing a mother, expressing this deep, lingering grief, writing, "Will you never know, my mother, how much I loved you?" It's heartbreaking. And her death pushed his already harsh father into a fatal spiral of alcoholism and despair, which left young Dostoevsky entirely alone in a very cruel world.
Section 4. Minutes from Death. The Ultimate Climax.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit. As a young man seeking connection, Dostoevsky joined a radical intellectual circle. They'd hang out, discuss politics, read illegal literature. Well, the Tsar's secret police found out, and the entire group was arrested and sentenced to death by firing squad. Just imagine this for a second. He is dragged out into a freezing square. He's blindfolded, tied to a post. The soldiers raise their rifles. He is told he has exactly 5 minutes left to live. 5 minutes. Standing there in the freezing cold, waiting for the bullets, he frantically calculates how to spend his final moments. 1 minute to say goodbye to his friends, 1 minute to think about himself, and a minute to just look at the world for the very last time. In that agonizing countdown, he experiences this radical awakening about the pure value of existence. He thinks to himself, what if I do not die? What if life is given back to me? What an eternity! I would turn every minute into an age. And then, literally seconds before the trigger is pulled, a messenger from the Tsar gallops in with a last-second pardon. No way, right? It was a mock execution. It was specifically designed for psychological torture. So instead of death, he was packed off to a Siberian prison. He survived, but he was forever changed.
Section 5. Addiction and Masterpieces. The Price of Genius. Now, you'd think surviving a mock execution and a brutal Siberian prison camp would make a man careful, but no. After prison, plunged into poverty, he developed a crippling roulette addiction. Like I said, he was a man of extreme extremes. At one point, desperate and destitute, he managed to secure a massive, life-saving loan of 1,000 rubles from a wealthy aunt. That was enough money to live very comfortably for an entire year. And what did our great sage do with it? He blew the entire sum in a single, frenzied night of drinking and gambling. He understood the psychology of self-destruction so perfectly because he was a victim of it himself. Because of this severe addiction, he found himself in so much debt that he signed a deeply predatory contract with a loan shark publisher. The terms were literal literary suicide. He had to deliver a brand new novel in exactly 26 days, or he would lose all publishing rights and profits to everything he wrote for the next 9 years. Talk about an impossible situation. With the clock ticking down, he hired a 20-year-old stenographer named Anna. Over an unbelievable 26-day sprint, pacing the room in an absolute frenzy, he dictated a novel based purely on his own manic gambling addiction. And against all odds, he delivered the masterpiece, The Gambler, right on time. But here's the profound irony of it all. Dictating a book about his own destructive addiction is what ultimately brought him the first true stability he had ever known, because Anna, the woman who saved his career, would eventually become his wife. Section 6. The Mirror of the Soul. Art imitates life. And this brings us to the core of his legacy. The reason Dostoevsky's work hits us so incredibly hard today is because his extreme life experiences directly birthed his art. When you look closely, you realize he wasn't just making this stuff up. He suffered from severe epileptic seizures, which he mapped directly onto the protagonist of The Idiot. The trauma of his harsh father and his mysterious death formed the absolute core of the brothers Karamazov. That terrifying mock execution where he had 5 minutes to live, he explicitly writes that exact scenario into The Idiot. And of course, we just saw how his ruinous roulette habit became The Gambler. He impartially observed the absolute darkest, most shameful parts of himself and repurposed them into these psychologically rich masterpieces. Ultimately, despite living a deeply flawed life, despite enduring crushing poverty, disease, and staring down the barrel of a firing squad, Dostoevsky didn't turn to bitterness. He looked at the darkest corners of human nature, including his very own, and came to a profound realization. He wrote in a letter, "The true hell is being unable to love." His answer to the absolute chaos of the world was always radical empathy. So the next time you see a polished Dostoevsky quote online, remember the chaotic, brilliant, and deeply human man behind it. He teaches us that our darkest moments really don't have to break us. I'll leave you with this. How might your own messy, flawed realities, your own struggles, be the exact key you need to unlock profound self-discovery?